good morning. The sun is getting low in the sky now, and occasionally when I turn a corner it flashes into my eyes, so I wear this visor. The trouble with being short is that the sort of flip down visors, you know, like this, can you see? It doesn't come, now if I were taller it would come up here, further here, it would protect my eyes. But as a matter of fact, it has very little effect on me because I'm so low down in the seat. One of these days I'm going to end up one of those little old ladies you see where you can only see the tops of their heads and their, you know, a pair of hands on the wheel like that. I don't think cars are made for such people. They're made with, well, basically they're designed by men, so they're made with men in mind. If they had women in mind, especially little old ladies, they'd have raises on the seats, you know, like you can push the seat back and forth and recline it and sit it up. Well, if they were thinking of women, especially shorter women, they'd have a thing in the seat that went up and down as well, wouldn't they? And that just shows you it's a man's world. I don't mind, the world can't be perfect for everyone. Don't think I'm beefing about it, I'm merely pointing something out. But if there happens to be a car designer among the list of people who are watching this video, perhaps you might give some thought to that. Or even to a sort of fold-up visor that you can, you know, you can put down, and then there's a little thing inside it that folds down a bit further. Ah, I'm going the roadworks way. Oh, anyway, look, talking about men's world and women's world, well, first of all, I've got to say, my husband watches an awful lot of total rubbish on the television. He likes those really trashy science fiction films. Unfortunately, Netflix and Amazon seem to have a plethora of really trashy sci-fi films. Oh, get onto the road. Goodness me, the fellow coming around the corner on the wrong side of the road just then. So he watches a lot of these, and occasionally when I'm passing through the sitting room I stop for a minute or so to look at the films. Now there are a lot of them featuring some very muscular men and some athletic young women in next to no clothing, all fighting as if on an equal footing. Now, speaking as somebody who has actually done martial arts, I can tell you that this doesn't really work that well. I was pretty good. Not marvellous, but pretty good. But I have to say that when I blocked a punch or whatever with my arm like that, I would end up with hematomas the size of oranges on my arm. And I had some terrible bruises. And that's because I was smaller and lighter boned than most of the fellas I was fighting, because it was mostly fellas. Now, I'm not saying that women can't fight men. I've done that and I have prevailed. What I am saying is that a lot of the fighting sequences you see would just break a woman in half if delivered by the sort of people that you see in these films. What interests me is that there seems to be very little understanding of or resource to other ways of fighting that women have adopted over centuries, thousands of years. What do I mean centuries? Millions of years of development. Or, look, I'm sure that most of you of reasonable turn of mind know what I'm talking about here. Each sex will have its own way of dealing with certain situations. The fact is that women, being weaker, very often do end up on the raw end of the deal. And civilization is what has helped to even the odds a little bit. You know, like police and laws about who goes in certain places and who doesn't, and that sort of thing, which a certain group of people seem to be determined to do away with. However, back to the trashy films that my husband likes to watch, which often show women punching men and giving as good as the men can dish out to them. This works only intermittently. For sure, there are some very well-toned women, athletic and fit, who could beat up a smaller man, but they would have a lot of trouble beating up a man who was the equivalently well-toned and developed as the women in the masculine way, which means twice as big. To go back into human history, women were never intended for fighting. They're far too valuable. If you go back to, you know, ape troops, the males are very big because they spend a lot of time fighting each other. It starts at the top. They have much thicker skulls for a start. They have thick skulls because they're, you know, and heavy jaws because they're biting and banging their heads against each other. And then, of course, they have to have thicker necks to support these thicker skulls. And then they have to have bigger shoulders to support everything else. And then, you know, all the way down. That's why the male shape is an inverted triangle. Females were never intended for that sort of thing. I'm not saying that women shouldn't do it. I believe that there is a place for women in combat in armies. I'm not saying they shouldn't be there at all, especially with the sort of modern equipment we have nowadays. I'm just saying we should acknowledge the difference. And women have a different way of looking at things, again, in general. And that's because the structure of their brain is different in general. And it is only when both sexes have their view taken note of that a society develops. The most developed societies in the world are the ones that have given equal validity to both sexes, because it's like binocular vision. You see things better when you've got binocular vision. The problem is when one sex prevails over the other or is given more credence, the society never develops. There were a lot of societies in which women were the dominant sex, and the men just sort of wandered about impregnating them, you know, with no real social meaning apart from that. Now, most of those societies have disappeared. because they've been taken over by the aggressive male-dominated societies. There are, I have heard of one or two, and they're fine, you know, perfectly reasonable social groupings. They just never developed that far because women in general are less adventurous than men in general. I have to keep saying this because you get people who do then say stuff like, oh, so you're telling me women can't invent stuff? Of course they can. But they are less likely to take risks and get themselves killed doing silly bugger things. And men, and that's why men do things and they kill themselves, because biologically they are not as important as women. So they're a bit more dispensable in that way. So they spend their time running risks, and sometimes they come up with something really, really, really brilliant. What worries me is that society now is going more into that feminine idea that you can't you can't take risks. Of course, if one of my sons killed himself doing something utterly stupid, I would be heartbroken for the rest of my life. I'm not saying it doesn't have a price. I'm wandering about. Well, you see, my husband watching these trashy films and these women whose answer to a challenge is to get out their bat labs or whatever and have a fight. No. There are other ways, and I was put in mind of that when I started thinking of a short story by Agatha Christie called Philomel Cottage. Now, I'm going to talk about Philomel Cottage and I'm going to give away the plot, so if you don't want to know the plot, then I'll say a few words and then I'll warn you when you should stop watching. The point about Philomel Cottage is that a woman who finds herself in a very bad situation, a fatal situation, uses her intelligence to overcome a potential murderer. Right. I'll go into it a bit deeper now. If you don't want to hear the rest, switch off, turn away now. Put your fingers in your ears, close your eyes and start singing la 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 la. Philomel Cottage opens with a description of a woman who was settled into a life of old maiddom when she was swept off her feet by a charming stranger, really. She had an understanding with a young man, but for many various reasons, most of them financial and to do with responsibilities, they didn't get married. So they had this relationship. They probably met each other every so often and went to the cinema maybe, that sort of thing. They liked talking to each other, but the idea of being married just didn't figure. And then she was swept off her feet. She discovered true passion and married this man and moved into a lovely little cottage, Philomel Cottage, which was a really comfortable little place, but very isolated. It was 2 miles from the nearest village. A few months after she got married, she realised there was something wrong with this man that she'd married, and she eventually came to the conclusion that he was going to murder her. It was to do with, she got a few clues, but one of them was a casual conversation with the gardener who had told her that her husband had mentioned in the village that they were going away the next day. And that was the first she'd heard of it. And she started putting two and two together. And because they lived so far away from the village and didn't really socialise that much with the people in the village, nobody would really notice they were missing. Or that she was missing, anyway. So then she realised that this man, she started searching through his personal effects and discovered that he was actually probably a murderer and certainly a bigamist and a swindler. And she was trapped in the house with him and couldn't get away from him, and she knew if she gave away that she realized what the problem was, he would simply do away with her straight away. So she resorted to some tricks. One of them was a sort of coded telephone conversation to summon help. A very clever idea. I'm not sure how it would work, but it was a very clever idea. And the other one was that she started to tell her husband, while she waited for the help, she started to tell him that she was confessing to having been a murderess. And the money she'd inherited was actually from 2 murdered husbands. And she told the story so well, it actually gave her husband a heart attack. And he died. Just as help arrived from the person she'd summoned. The interesting thing about the story is that you're not quite sure that she was actually making this up. There is a vague possibility that she really was a murderess and had done the things that she was confessing to her husband. It is possible. And that's the intriguing and clever thing about the story, and the delicate way that Christie tells it. But what I was saying was that she didn't fight the man. She knew she didn't have a chance. She used her intelligence and she got the result anyway. Right, well, I'm at the stables, so I'll stop talking now. Speak to you later. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Grannyopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.grannyopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.